Hi, and welcome to Berry Aftercare or Berry Aftercare, the podcast, depending on where you are tuning in from. Welcome. I'm Dr. Connie Stapleton, and today we're going to continue to talk about that discussion that's been ongoing for a couple of weeks, starting back with talking about things that happen in childhood that prevent us from living our best lives. And how that relates to food and weight loss and being a post op is when we have experienced unpleasant things in our childhoods, ranging from, being targeted by bullies or criticized by parents or made fun of at school or whatever it happens to be, all the way to really horrific things like physical abuse or sexual abuse or, chronic losses as a child, all kinds of things that affect our lives in ways children aren't adequately capable of processing from a cognitive perspective. Kids oftentimes take things that happen in their early lives that are difficult and somehow interpret that as they're being less than or not good enough or not important enough or in some way make it about themselves. And while that's very natural and normal for a child, it has unpleasant and unhealthy negative consequences in our adult lives because those things don't just go away. Those thoughts about ourselves settle in and become part of how we view life as though we're not good enough in some way, shape, or form. Now, this does not apply to everyone who struggles with the disease of obesity, but it applies to enough people who struggle with the disease of obesity that I think it's critical to talk about. So, if you struggle with some self esteem issues, and almost everybody struggles with some shame issues related to their weight, then listen in and we're going to talk about how our communication skills help us to set healthier boundaries. Last week's podcast and videos for Berry Aftercare were all about setting boundaries because boundaries keep us safe. Boundaries are what tell people, no, I'm not going to do this. What tell food, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not eating you. You can call at me all you want, but I am not giving in to you. I am the boss. Food is not the boss of you, right? Nor are your emotions. So you might be upset and your normal thing to do is to turn to food. So you may be an emotional eater. So you can also talk back to emotions just like you can talk back to food and say, emotions, you're not the boss of me. I am in charge of myself, and I'm going to follow through with the goals I have set for my weight loss and my weight maintenance. I am behaving like a healthy adult, and I'm valuing myself enough to do so. But when kids are abused or neglected or suffer a lot of losses, that sense of self isn't often strong enough when we're adults to set those boundaries. And food is a comfort. So we have to kind of do the deeper work sometimes, the deeper psychological work, so we can clean out that emotional closet and recognize that we have so much inherent worth and so much inherent value. And we need to set boundaries for ourselves to keep ourselves safe. We need to set boundaries for ourselves in terms of food, and we need to set boundaries with other people. Now, in order to be able to set boundaries with other people to keep ourselves safe, not just when it comes to food, but in all areas of our lives, then we need to have healthy communication. Now, communication is a topic we could talk about for days. And it's an interesting thing because we talk, right? We communicate all the time, verbally, non-verbally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we say so much. And I've done a couple of episodes on some of the reality shows on television related to weight loss. And I've gotten comments from people. It's like, you don't have to say a word because your eyes express it all. So sometimes we don't have to use our words or our voice to be communicative. And we have tells or signs, or we show it in our eyes or our facial expressions that let people know exactly what we're thinking, right? Apparently, I'm one of those people. Well, today we're going to talk about how to improve your communication to reflect what it is you really want and to be able to set boundaries in a healthier, easier way. Like I said, this is a topic we could talk about for hours and days, seriously. And I'm going to try to condense this into a 30-minute chit chat. Well, there are lots of ways people communicate. Many of them are very unhealthy. And I'm going to talk about those first, and we're going to get to what we want to learn to do. And it's a learned behavior. Using positive, direct communication is a skill that most people do not possess. And so I'm going to give you some tips about how to do that. And then hopefully you will practice them and do some more reading on your own. All right, so a lot of people communicate in a passive way. And passive communication is very, very indirect. In other words, passive communicators want to avoid conflict at all costs. Now, there's an issue with that, right? Avoiding conflict is partly personality, but it's also partly I don't believe in myself enough to stand up for myself. So let's realize we have enough value to say what we mean and to say it directly and to say it appropriately. So, indirect, passive communication is, I'm a people pleaser. Do you describe yourself as being a people pleaser and you say what you think other people want to hear, hiding your true thoughts and feelings? That's not going to do you any good in the long run. Now, there may be times when that's called for, but usually we want to avoid passive communication because passive communication basically is a situation you set yourself up in to lose. It says to people, I don't care enough about myself to say how I really think or how I really feel. You win, right? Maybe you're afraid of conflict. Maybe you're afraid of that person. Maybe you're intimidated. Maybe you say things like, it's just not worth it. Well, you are worth it. You are you're worth voicing your truth. And here would be some examples of passive communication. If you say to somebody, it doesn't matter where we eat, we'll go wherever you want. That's fine with me. Now, if that's true, then that's true and it's not passive. But if you really do have an opinion about this, but you're not saying so, then that would be passive communication. You're not saying, you know what, that place just doesn't have a lot of options for me as a post-op. So I would prefer if we'd go somewhere else. But if you sit back and just say, you know what, whatever's fine, but you have an opinion on that, that is passive communication. And it's not the healthiest thing. You might say, I don't want to upset my spouse, or I don't want to upset my children, or my partner, or my coworkers, or whatever. So I don't say anything when they bring my trigger foods into the house or into the place of work or eat it in front of me. That's very passive, right? It's like putting yourself through torture rather than just say, this is really uncomfortable for me. I'm going to excuse myself until you're finished, enjoying your meal or whatever it is, right? So passive behavior is not real healthy. It's an indication that your self-esteem is a little bit low. Just as unhealthy is aggressive behavior. So on the one end, we have aggressive. On the other end, we have passive. We just talked about passive. So let's talk about what aggressive behavior is. And aggressive behavior is really not healthy. It's kind of being a bully. It's not respecting what other people are saying, not respecting their opinions, just kind of bowling over them with things they have to say. If you think politics or religion, right, and two people are just screaming over each other because they're not being respectful of the other person's position, that's aggressive behavior. It's aggressive communication, and it's not going to go anywhere. People who are aggressive in their communication don't apologize. They don't say, wow, my emotions got the best of me. I really bowled over you. It's disrespectful of other people's rights. And people who are aggressive communicators don't think, they have to apologize or, ask. They're just kind of bullies, right? The purpose of it actually is very similar to those people who are passive. Passive people don't speak up because they don't feel they have worth. Aggressive people don't feel they have a lot of worth, and so they're just going to bully their way past everybody else. It's a way to avoid discomfort. Passive people avoid discomfort by not saying what's true for them. Aggressive people avoid discomfort by just bullying everybody and getting their way. Both are very, very unhealthy forms of communication. And aggressive communication would sound something like this. You said you don't care where we're going to eat, so here's where we're going. It's just like, boom, laying down the law, and it's ugly, right? It's disrespectful. The other example that I shared with passive, here's how the aggressive person would handle somebody bringing their trigger foods into the house or eating in front of me. How dare you bring that into the house? You know that that is a trigger food, and if you bring that into this house again, you're really going to be sorry. It's just confrontational and unkind and bullying. Again, unhealthy. And it suggests a lack of self-worth because I want to avoid conflict. And people don't think of it in terms of what purpose does this serve, but the purpose in passive or aggressive behavior is often, I just don't want to deal with the conflict. I'm going to get my way or I'm going to give in to the other person's way. Either end of that is not a healthy place to be. So an aggressive person says, I win, I'm going to shut you down, I care about me, and I'm not caring too much about you. Really unhealthy. Both sides of that are really unhealthy. Now, a third way of being unhealthy in communication is to be passive aggressive, right? You can be passive with your words and aggressive with your behavior. In other words, you let people know what you're thinking or how you feel without saying a thing. Or you may say one thing, but all of your nonverbals are saying something else. And it's manipulative, right? It's a manipulative kind of behavior. The others are manipulative as well, but this is also being irresponsible. Passive behavior, aggressive behavior, or communication and passive aggressive communication are all irresponsible because they're not the truth. You're not sharing your truth in a direct way. And a lot of times it's because you're afraid of conflict. And you're afraid of conflict a lot of times because you don't think you have enough worth to say what is the truth. Now, there are other circumstances, and you might be arguing, well, I avoid conflict because I was always scared as a child. That's probably true. You're not a child anymore, though. And so you have to find ways to overcome that and realize that conflict does not have to be ugly and loud and mean and critical, right? It can simply mean stating what I want and what I need in this situation, but you have to learn that. So passive aggressive, it's not directly sharing what you want, how you feel, but being determined to get your own way, right? So let me give you an example, if you can imagine this. It would be like two people facing each other, shaking hands, smiling, and at the same time, they're holding baseball bats behind their backs. It's like, I'm saying the right words, I'm doing it with a smile on my face, but I'd really like, to hit you with this baseball bat. So it's passive, but you feel really aggressive. Let me give you some examples of what that might sound like using the same two examples that I have used with the other forms of communication. So a passive aggressive person might say, wherever you want to eat is fine. So they say those words, but when you get to the restaurant, they complain about every single thing on the menu. So passive verbal, aggressive nonverbal, right? Or aggression showed by I'm complaining, about everything. I said it was okay, but really it's not. I'm letting you know it's not by complaining. Another example of passive aggressive communication in terms of bringing trigger foods into the house would be maybe verbalizing, sure, you just feel free to bring anything you want into this house. You eat it whenever you want. And then the aggressive part would be throwing it away when the person's not around. You're saying it's okay, so your actions and your words don't match at all. One is very passive and no problem. The other is very aggressive, right? So those are all unhealthy ways. And a passive aggressive communicator says, I lose and you lose. So I lose because I'm not being honest about how I think and how I feel. You lose because, by God, I'm going to take it out on you in one way or another. So I don't care about myself, and really, I don't care about you. That's kind of what it all suggests. So a lot of people are unaware of their forms of communication, but it would really benefit you to learn how other people perceive your communication, or really do some reading about unhealthy forms of communication, because awareness is the first step of change. I literally had no idea what an aggressive communicator I was. And people, when I got into treatment, the therapist would point it out to me. When I got into my schooling, professors would point it out to me, and I really had to learn this and work on changing it. And you want to learn direct communication. But before I go to what direct communication would sound like, let me give you some clues that you may be using unhealthy communication. So when you're talking to someone, if you're having a discussion or a debate, or if it's turning into like an argument, it's unhealthy if you start your sentences with you always, or you do this, or you do that, or if they're saying, you hurt my feelings. Well, if you wouldn't have said this, then I wouldn't have said this. So pointing the finger verbally or literally at somebody with the words you is a very unhealthy way to do things, right? Being passive aggressive, which we talked about, using a lot of sarcasm. Now, sarcasm can be funny and humorous, but if you're using it in a painful, critical way, it's not really funny at all. And the literal translation of sarcasm means to tear the flesh. So you don't want to do that. Um, Hang on one second. Okay. All right. So it's unhealthy and it's not fair to you or to other people to not share your true thoughts, especially if you then hold resentment. And I've talked to so many people throughout my career, not just people who suffer from obesity, but people in general, because not very many people, no matter what, have healthy communication skills. And a lot of people are people pleasers, and then they feel resentment. They feel taken advantage of, and they're ticked off. But really, that's on them because they're not being honest about what they're saying, right? Or if you expect other people to read your mind, well, we've been married so long, if, I shouldn't have to tell them how I feel. Well, BS. I don't care how long you've been with somebody or how long you've known somebody, you are responsible for making your needs known, right? All right, so I'm going to give you some examples of a healthy form of communication, and that is what's called assertive communication. Assertive communication is difficult to do if you don't have a sense of self-esteem. If your sense of self-esteem is low, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to muster up the courage to stand up for yourself, to just be honest. You don't have to be angry and uptight and aggressive and bullying, but just to say, this is what I'm thinking. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I would like. And assertive communication is healthy. It's the healthiest form of communication. It's the most effective form of communication. And if you have two people who can engage in assertive communication, you can work through problems. You don't have to have loud discussions. You can, easily, find a way to work together. You can find a way to feel confident and heard, and you can come to some conclusions without getting into uh, manipulation or playing games with people. Assertive communication says, I know what I need. I know what I want. I'm going to share that with you. I don't expect you to agree with me or to give me everything I want or need, but I am going to let you know what those things are. And I need you to let me know what your limits are. I need you to let me know what you need and what you want. I may not be able to give you those things all the time, but at least we know where each other are coming from, right? So it's being honest without expecting that people bow or cater to us. And it's the least used form of communication. And that is super, super, super sad, right? So let's talk about what assertive communication would look like and why it's important. As I said, it's honest. You can communicate about difficult topics. You can, and here's the thing with assertive communication, and this is why it's so important to have healthy self-esteem, because then your emotions don't get in the way. If you get really defensive really easily, or if you get really protective of yourself, or if you want to lash out at people, it's because our emotions get in the way. And that comes from a sense of needing to protect ourselves. And that comes from a sense of I don't feel safe, or I don't feel confident, or I feel um, like a child in this situation, or I'm feeling bullied, which I may not be, but that's my perception of this because that's how it's always been in my life. Or I'm feeling criticized, even though that may not be what's happening, but I'm used to being criticized. And so things are coming at me from a filter. If we have those issues in our lives, it's going to be real difficult to engage in assertive, healthy communication. That's why it's so critical to get into therapy, clean out that baggage, learn that you have worth, learn that you have value, learn to recognize when you're being defensive, learn to recognize when you're being critical, learn to recognize when you're feeling attacked, but you're not being. Learn to recognize when you're feeling criticized, but you're really not being objectively. Because we make up stories. We make up stories because of things that have happened in our lives, and they may not be true. A lot of times people say, I'm feeling attacked. Well, that's not really because you're being attacked, it's because your defenses are risen, right? Now, this is all deep and complicated and whatever. But if you don't learn to value yourself, you're not going to be able to communicate healthy. And if you can't communicate healthy, it's going to be really hard for you to set boundaries. And if it's really hard for you to set boundaries, it's going to be really hard for you to keep your weight off. That's how it's all connected, right? So let me talk about some ways, some tips, some tools to things to say to help you learn to practice assertive communication. All right. So if you're the type that says yes to everything without even thinking about it because you want to make other people happy, or you're a people pleaser or whatever, maybe try saying before you say, of course I'll do that. Of course I'd be happy to do that. Yes, of course I'll bring all the supplies, or I'll bring all the whatever you need to whatever event every time, or of course I'll host the party, or of course I'll host the shower. Right? And then you get overwhelmed and you don't have time and you get ticked off and you're resentful. When people ask you to do something, say, I'll check my schedule and I'll get back to you about that. So learn to have a placeholder. I'll check my schedule and I'll get back to you about that. My children are really good about this. Anytime you talk about doing something, they will automatically say, I will check with my husband, or I'll check with my wife and I'll get back to you about that. Right? And that's really respectful of their partners, and it's respectful of yourself too. And maybe you just say it to buy yourself some time. so that you can go home and say, you know what, I've been asked to do this. I don't have time to do this. I want to do this, but it's really not the right time for me. And then people can help you practice saying no. And you can practice it and rehearse it. So you can go back to that person and say, I would love to be able to help you. This year isn't the best time for me. Check with me next year when you do your event, but my calendar is really full right now, right? So you can buy yourself some time by saying, let me check my calendar or let me check with my partner and I will get back to you. That's a good way to do that. But then you have to go back to the person and still say no, but it gives you time to practice doing so with other people who are going to kind of coach you about how you can do that. Now, if people give you feedback, maybe you didn't ask for it, maybe they're giving you unsolicited advice, or maybe they're saying something to you that you just don't want to hear and you feel yourself getting defensive. And this happens to me from time to time, right? Because no matter how adult or healthy we learn to behave, there are still some triggers inside of us, right? People are going to push our buttons, but we can learn not to react to those buttons by saying, well, you did this, or you did that, or you do it too, right? Yeah, I've done it. I'm guessing you have too. When you feel that knot in your stomach, or you feel yourself wanting to point the finger or say, well, you do it too, hold your breath and say, thanks for sharing that with me. I'll take that into consideration. Now, you may go home and say, they're full of crap. Or you may go home and you might think to yourself, you know what, I hate to admit it, but they were right about that. But the point is, rather than reacting, we want to respond. We want to respond. We're going to pretend like we're a healthy adult for the moment, even though inside we may be churning. And that's okay. You can go home and process that churning. But to respond in a direct, assertive way and just say, thank you for the feedback. I'll go home and process that. But think about what happens in the real world. Did I ask for your opinion? If I wanted your opinion, I'd have asked for it. Or thanks for butting in where you don't belong. People do all kinds of things, flip each other off from the car, all these unhealthy things, right? Be the adult and say, thank you. I will process that. And you may go back and say, you know what? I've thought about what you said and I want you to know that just didn't resonate with me. You're free to have your opinion. I just don't agree. Or you might even go back and say, you know what? I thought about what you said and it really stung, but there was some truth to that. I do tend to, whatever it was, right? This is how we learn. This is how we grow. This is how we become a healthier adult. And these things are all important because if you just seed on what they said, what might you do? Turn to food to make yourself feel better. That's not going to get you where you want to be, right? That's engaging in emotional eating, and you're only damaging yourself. And that reflects your self-worth because people with a healthy self-esteem don't engage in self-destructive behavior. They just don't. Maybe once in a while, but not regularly. Okay. So, Grandma, very offended at the holidays. You will not eat her 7,000 calorie piece of cake. Or you get guilted. If you loved me, please, you just have to have one bite, just one piece. A healthy, assertive response is, of course, I love this. It's one of my favorite things in my whole life. I'm not going to have any, though, because my health has to come first. And I'm afraid if I take one bite, I'm going to eat the whole cake. I do love you, though, Granny. Right? It's just setting those boundaries for yourself. And it's not easy to do. It is very, very difficult. You don't like hurting people's feelings. You don't like hurting the people you love, right? I'm not going to have any, right? Or just, I say that and I catch myself because it's not that easy, right? You just say this. Well, that's difficult. I understand that. One of the things you can learn to say that's a very healthy response when people are trying to push food on you is, it's not an option for me. That's not an option for me. I don't do that. And I've shared this with you before, I believe, that once you get in the habit of doing that, like when I used to work at the office and they'd order in food, no thanks, I don't order out. I don't eat that kind of food during the week. People quit asking me to order out because they just knew and it was okay. Nobody was bothered by it. It's just not an option for me. I don't drink. When people offer me a drink, no thank you. Oh, come on, just have one. No, thank you. It's not an option for me. Right? You don't have to make excuses. You don't have to explain why. I'm being fair and firm and honest. That's not an option for me. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings. That's not my intention. That's not helpful for me. That's not healthy for me. It's not an option. Healthy people with healthy self-esteem learn to do that over time. This isn't going to happen overnight. But if you do the hard work, preferably with a therapist, because it's kind of hard not to sometimes without one, but if you can do it without a therapist, that's way cool with me. I don't care how you get there, just get there. Increasing your self-worth. As you increase your self-esteem and your belief that you have tremendous value and worth, you will learn to say no and not feel guilty about it for real, right? Okay, so there are some suggestions. And that says, I win because I'm not going to do anything to harm myself, but you also win because I'm being honest with you. I'm being truthful with you. You don't have to like it, but I hope you'll respect it. I've used that line a lot of times with people. I know you don't like what I just said, or I know you're angry about what I said, and you don't have to like it, but I hope you'll respect it, right? That's being true to me and considerate of you. Right? I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm telling you what is okay for me and what is not. I hope you can respect that. Now, the last thing I'm going to give you in this video today is a 4-part sentence. And then on Thursday, in Berry Aftercare, I'm going to give you this in many, many, many examples. All right. And I have seen this come home in cartoon form with kindergartners. So this is a beautiful, wonderful thing to teach people. The younger they are, the better off they are in learning to use this. Now, the older you are, the harder this can be. But if you use this, it will be a game changer in your life. There are 4 parts to this communication. And I will post this as a form on Berry Aftercare. The 4 parts to this are when blank, I feel or I felt blank, because blank, and I would like blank. Now let me give you some examples in this very therapeutic standard form, right? It sounds kind of stilted, but then I'll use it again and I'll use the same 4 parts, but I won't use them in this order. But while you're learning this, it would be a good idea at night to just practice some things that took place during your day or that are coming up using this format. And it's an amazing, assertive, healthy form of communication. All right, so let's say somebody brings in a trigger food, it's your spouse, all right, and it's really difficult for you. So you say to your spouse, when you bring such and such food into the house, I feel sad and scared because it hurts me to know that you would bring it into the house understanding that's a trigger of mine. And it scares me because I'm afraid I might give into temptation. I would like for you to enjoy the food, but to do so some other place beside the house or when I'm not here. So you're saying, this is the situation when you're bringing in these foods. I feel sad because, it's a tough situation, and it saddens me to think you would put me in such a tough situation. And I feel scared. I feel scared because I don't know that I have the skill to withstand the temptation at this point in time. Here's what I would like. Now, that doesn't mean the spouse has to do what you ask, but hopefully they will, right? So when you bring this into the house, I feel scared because I don't know that I have the strength. I would appreciate if you would eat this elsewhere. There's one example. All right. Here's another one. Let's say your coworker or friend continues to recommend a buffet. When you recommend that we eat at the buffet, I feel uncomfortable because buffets are really tough for me in terms of keeping my food to a healthy quantity. I would appreciate if we could eat elsewhere. So you're saying when this happens, when you suggest a buffet, I feel uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable, right? So you're sharing, I feel this way because buffets are not the best place for me in terms of quantity of food. I would appreciate. So I'm not doing anything hurtful, aggressive, passive aggressive. I'm just saying it is what it is, right? Now, we can expand this to areas besides, food. So when the kid doesn't take the garbage out, you know, kid, when you don't take the garbage out, I feel angry because this is your agreed upon chore. And when you don't do it, then it puts the rest of us in an uncomfortable position to either do it for you or to throw garbage on the floor. I would appreciate or I would like if you would follow through with your job. I didn't have to yell at the kid. I didn't have to say, how many times do I have to tell you? Blah, 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 blah. Right? Or the boss gives you one more thing and one more deadline. When you bring me this task, um, I feel overwhelmed because I would like to be able to complete all the tasks on time to make your job easier and to be a good employee. But I would like you to give me, a ranking of the priorities of these tasks because I really can't get them all done in this amount of time. So again, it's saying, when you give me tasks with deadlines, that's the situation. I feel overwhelmed because I have 5 tasks with 5 deadlines. So what I'd like is just could you prioritize these for me so I can get them done in the order that's most important to you? Right? So we take our emotions out of it. We don't go, I can't do one more thing. Now you might call your best friend and, let it all out. But when you go to the person involved, be a healthy adult. So you can use these 4 statements in almost any kind of what you might consider a conflict or a situation to avoid conflict, right? Now, that doesn't mean the other person isn't going to come back with their typical unhealthy behavior. But if you can stick to these 4 aspects, right? Now you can change it up a little bit, right? So let me think of another situation. Okay, honey, I was really worried last night. So I start with how I'm feeling. I was worried when you were 2 hours late and I hadn't heard from you because I was afraid something might have happened. I would really appreciate if you're going to be late if you could give me a call, right? Which is going to get you a lot further than you go, seriously, you're 2 hours late and you didn't bother to call me? That's so disrespectful. Right? Now that's what you might feel like doing. But if you can adult up and say, I was really worried. Or you might say, I was really angry because I felt disrespected when you didn't call me to let me know you would be late. But you know how you feel, right? I felt worried, or I felt angry, or I felt upset, or I felt discouraged, or I felt. Now, here's where people screw this up big time. When you didn't call me, I felt like you were a jerk. That's how people mess this up, and it becomes an unhealthy communication because people get this I feel confused with I think. When you say I feel, you have to use a feeling word there, and we suck with knowing how we feel. So you have to learn your feeling words and use a feeling word. When this happened, I felt sad, mad, scared, worried, concerned, angry, rageful, whatever your feeling might have been. Not, I felt like you, because then we're just back to saying you're a jerk, right? Not healthy. I felt frustrated. I felt angry. I was discouraged. And again, it's not because it hurt me, because I felt left out. It's about your thoughts. It's about your feelings. It's about what you need in terms of your communication. We don't get to communicate by pointing the finger and saying, because you're a jerk, because you did this, because you did that, because you anything. I felt when this happened. Now you can say, I felt mad when you didn't come home, or I felt upset when you brought this in the house, but that's a description of what happened, not what you did, right? If I say, I felt mad because you're an inconsiderate jerk by bringing that food in the house, well, that's not going to work so well, right? Now, this takes time and practice. And it's very difficult to get our big emotions out of the way. But our big emotions are an indication that there's something protective or what, and that's not necessarily wrong or bad, but process your big emotions with your friend. And then when you go to the party involved in your circumstances, you can do it with less emotion, because you will always get further with assertive, unemotional responses rather than reactions. All right, guys, that's a lot to take in for today, I know, but this is huge, not just in terms of keeping in line with your goals for your weight, but also in living a healthy lifestyle. So do practice. When this happened, I felt, use a feeling word, because this is how it affected me. I would appreciate if what you need or what you want. But we don't get to expect people to give us those things, but we absolutely have the right to say what we want or what we need. All right. So that's it for today. It's a lot. Join me on Thursday, berryaftercare.com, www.berryaftercare.com. Join us there. Take care. Make it a great one. I'll talk with you soon. Bye-bye.